Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Gaylord Avery, inviting you to come aboard our time machine as we make a most miraculous journey back through the centuries to the period of the French Renaissance. Our setting is the Palace of Quivira, where the knights of Quivira, the ladies of the royal court, feudal lords of Cibola, courtiers to the throne, attend the crowning of our liege lord, King Ak-Sar-Ben 55. His consort to the Quivira throne, Queen Ak-Sar-Ben, shall in turn ascend the throne with her king, thus to reign over the knights and ladies of the realm. Enter the pages. The hour has arrived and the fanfare has heralded the ceremony to begin. Mustering the youthful dignity that bespeaks the page of the court, the young royalty of Quivira begin their march to the throne room. In the gleaming white satin and gold raiment of the court page, we see puckish little Jay Cook, adorable Joan Carroll Harding, petite Willisine Collins, and demure Pamela Bartling. There's the captivating smile of Elizabeth Ann Naughton, the flashing eyes of Mary Taylor, Mary Marjorie Walsh with her golden curls, accompanied by her partner, charming little Catherine Louise Schutz. The pages of the portal are starry-eyed Barbara Ann Miskell and personable young William Bruce Loring, Jr. I can't help but wonder what the pages must be thinking as they fasten their attention to the splendor which lies before them. All of us have read about courtrooms, some have even seen them. More have been told about them, but here before their very eyes tonight is the unfolding of a magnificent dream, such as would thrill any who are young in heart. The pages reach their places before the throne, and shortly the trumpeters will announce the approach of the dignitaries and His Majesty's council. The doors open and enter the Grand Chancellor, Mr. Kenneth F. Reed. The Chancellor is dressed in a coat of black brocade with lace cuffs, lace jabot, black knee breeches, black hose, and black slippers. His Chancellor's jewel is hung from a ribbon around his neck. The ribbon carries the three colors of Ak-Sar-Ben, red, green, and gold. The Prime Minister, Mr. Edward T. Foster, and the Cardinal, Mr. William Miskell, now enter. The Prime Minister's costume is similar to that of the Grand Chancellor. The Cardinal is dressed in a deep red-colored robe with white surplice and a long red silk cape. His Majesty's Council enters the court of Quivira and makes its way to the throne room. Council members are clothed in full evening dress, white tie and tails, with the traditional Ak-Sar-Ben colors embodied in the ribbon around the neck from which hangs the jewel. His Majesty's Council is composed of Joseph Barker, Jr., Dana C. Bradford, M.L. Champagne, John F. Davis, Frank Fogarty, Carol D. Geetson, John J. Gillen, Jr., Robert H. Hall, W.D. Hosford, Jr., R.H. Mallory, Ambrose J. Seats, H.L. Van Amberg, and J.W. Sharp. When the council has taken its position in the throne room, the Prime Minister will summon the Board of Governors of Ak-Sar-Ben to announce their selection of the new monarch of Quivira.
To the throne, attend, that the address may be read, and that the crowning of our liege lord, King Ak-Sar-Ben 55, may take place with the full dignity of the ancient and hallowed custom of our realm. Within the council chambers of the royal palace, the king's advisors are assembled. There, in accordance with the tradition of the realm, to publish and appoint the state of the kingdom, and to name a new monarch of Quivira, the new king of our court.
The heralds have sounded their call. The Chancellor and the Prime Minister have proclaimed their texts. And from the portals enter the governors. The governors of the Board of Exarban are composed of Melvin Beacons, Harry B. Coffey, J.E. Davidson, Edward G. Hinton, Russell J. Hopley, W.D. Lane, James P. Lee, W.B. Miller, Jr., Ellsworth Mosier, E.F. Pettis, V.J. Scott, Robert H. Storrs, and W.O. Swanson. The governors are clothed in full dress coats, black satin knee breeches, black silk hose, and black patent leather slippers. The governors also wear the Exarban colors in the ribbons around their necks, from which hang the customary jewels. The raiment of the Board of Governors probably does as much as any one thing to set the mood and the atmosphere of the court of Quivira. These historic costumes seem to put an authentic stamp on the coronation. As the governors slowly near the throne room, one feels that here indeed is a magnificent chapter from a splendid book of history. The President of the Board of Governors hands the pronouncement and the warrant, which the Prime Minister called for, to two pages who receive them at the bottom of the steps of the throne room. The pages take the pronouncement and the warrant to the Prime Minister, who hands the pronouncement to the Chancellor. The governors are now taking their positions on either side of the throne room. At this point, we await the Prime Minister to call for the reading of the royal proclamation and the King's warrant by the Grand Chancellor.
Pageant of green and gold and red. And even our own castle grounds have not been overlooked by nature and her obedient servants. For our new livestock building adjacent to the castle houses the finest cattle in the world, brought in annually by our noble husbandmen and their sons and daughters, that this world may be fed. Our blessings are manifold, and our hopes for the future have never been brighter.
Enter the King's Hussars. Here is the flash and the fire, the action and the romance of the military. Here is the sprightly centerpiece of the court, the devoted Hussars of the King. As trim as their brilliant green coats, as daring as the red trim, as splendid as the gold braid and the gold buttons, the King's Hussars march proudly and precisely before the court of Quivira. The King's Hussars are captained by Mr. Robert Sage. His loyal men are John Gilmore, Stanley Traub, Darwin Schulte, Leroy Crosby, Mac Bailey, Ronald Guile, Ernest Bebb, and William Burke. This ROTC group from Central High School is under the direction of Sergeant Joseph B. McGrath, military instructor. The King's Hussars demonstrate to the knights and ladies of the realm how a well-disciplined group of true military men execute precise close-order drill. With the rapid squads right and squads left, it's easy to see why these men are chosen to be the King's Hussars. The King's Hussars have taken their place, and the Grand Chancellor summons the new monarch to the throne. Enter the ring bearer, Roland Frank Wellman II. And he is followed by the crown bearer, James Joseph Bemis.
Our new monarch, King Exarban 55, James Leroy Welch.
Ladies and gentlemen, you have heard the Chancellor announce to all subjects of Quivira our new monarch, King Exarban 55, James Leroy Welch. The King starts his stately march to the throne, attended by his train bearers, Charles Michael Byrne, Donald Lincoln Cook, Richard Barton Coons, and Timothy John Rouse. Exarban's King 55 is president of the Butler Welsh Grain Company in Omaha. He's widely known as a crusader for Kemergy. Mr. Welch is a member of the Omaha Dock Board and River Development Committee of the Chamber of Commerce and has been active in the development of the Missouri River. He's a member of the board of the Livestock National Bank, Samartic Company, Salvation Army, United Benefit Life Insurance Company, Child Saving Institute, Union Stockyards Company, a regent of the University of Nebraska, a member of the Omaha Country Club, Happy Hollow Club, Omaha Athletic Club, Omaha Club, Union League Club of Chicago, the University Club of Lincoln, and is a jester and a Shriner. Mr. Welsh and his wife live at 426 Fair Acres Road. And now the Cardinal places the crown upon the monarch's head. He puts the ring on Mr. Welsh's finger. And the Prime Minister and the Cardinal accompany the new king to the throne. The King's Hussars take their positions on either side of the throne room. And now, on behalf of the new king, the Chancellor summons to the king's presence the princesses of the realm. The princesses are Miss Jean Harriet Rubenstein, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Harry Rubenstein, Nancy Helen Stimson, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Frank R. Stimson, Joanne Patricia McDonnell, representing Council Bluffs, who is the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Edward R. McDonnell, Arlene Ann Sconce, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Alva Curtis Sconce, Joan Muller, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Joseph P. Muller, Nancy Burns, whose parents are Mr. and Mrs. William Thomas Burns, Patricia Jean Walters, daughter of Dr. and Mrs. Denzel B. Walters, Sarah Louise Stute, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Clinton Briggs Stute, Nancy Jane Lowe, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. James Byron Lowe, Barbara Ruth Stryker, daughter of Mrs. Gwynne Burr and the late Herd Stryker, Mary Suzanne Carson, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Hiram J. Carson, Mary Jean Cranny, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Jesse Daniel Cranny, Miss Doris Buffett, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Howard H. Buffett, Marjorie Ann Benson, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Grant Ames Benson, Gretchen Ann Swoboda, whose parents are Mr. and Mrs. Herman C. Swoboda, and Lorraine Lamar, the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Harold Lamar. The gowns created by Wilson Fulmer of Ben Gam in New York City are perfection, excelled only by the particular charm and grace of each lovely princess. Princesses take their positions on steps, which extend out on either side of the throne room. They look breathtakingly beautiful as the various colored gowns blend together, forming indeed a veritable rainbow on either side. And now the Chancellor, by royal command, summons the countesses from neighboring realms to appear. Once again, a graceful procession begins, this time from the throne room itself, as the countesses enter and descend the steps that lead from the throne. They've come to serve as maids-in-waiting to Her Majesty the Queen. The countesses are Jacqueline Jean Day of Missouri Valley, Iowa. She's the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Francis H. Day. Jane Cheney of Glenwood, Iowa, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Paul H. Cheney. Marilyn Jane Dawson from Redwood, Nebraska, is the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Harold H. Dawson. Miss Charlene Ray Holcomb, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Royal Charles Holcomb of Broken Bow, Nebraska. Betty Joan Costel is a countess from Hastings. She's the daughter of Dr. and Mrs. Otto A. Costel. Lorna Lou Bornholt of Wausau, Nebraska. She's the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Herbert J. Bornholt. Mary Eugenie Sampson from Nebraska City is the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Donald Ferris Sampson. Margaret Reynolds comes from North Platte, Nebraska, and is the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Don B. Reynolds. Barbara Zemer is one of two countesses from Lincoln. She's the daughter of Dr. and Mrs. Stanley G. Zemer. Catherine Ann Elliott resides in Scotts Bluff. Her parents are Mr. and Mrs. John Gordon Elliott. Martha Elizabeth Aitken, she's the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Inglis Aitken of Lincoln. Janet Ray Nutzman of Nehawken is the daughter of Mrs. Eugene A. Nutzman. And now enter the Queen's Own Hussars. They're captained by Robert Stryker. His men are Joe Serb, Harris Poley, Norman Hankey, Paul Cruz, Stuart Gibson, Alan Milder, Arnold Kyman, and Jack Irwin. The Queen's Hussars are also from the Central High School ROTC unit. The Hussars are now in their positions, awaiting the entrance of the Queen. The portal doors swing slowly open, and the Prime Minister awaits the appearance of Her Majesty so that he may announce her name. The ring bearer enters, Anne Lucretia McDermott, followed by the crown bearer, Phoebe Gertrude Pierpont.
Gracious Majesty, the 55th Queen of Quivira, Suzanne Storrs.
This is the climax of the coronation of 1949. 22,000 eyes turn to see Susan Elizabeth Storrs, who takes her place among the lovely queens of history. Queen Susan Elizabeth is beautifully and dramatically gowned in polished white slipper satin. We dip deeply into the richness of French Renaissance for this superb Marie Antoinette gown. The bodice is tightly fitted with a deep sweetheart neckline. Short, softly gathered puffed sleeves add a gentleness to the satin elegance. The bodice has an embroidered pattern of jewels, sequins, rhinestones, seed pearls, and bugle beads artfully designed to add splendor and richness to Her Majesty's gown. The skirt is billowy elegance, 10 to 15 yards around the bottom. The gown is lined with French tarletan and worn over nylon in starched organdy petticoats with deep ruffles. This is an unforgettable scene. Glistening jewels on a polished white chiffon satin gown of the great Renaissance period, worn proudly by a lucky new queen, Miss Susan Elizabeth Storrs. And now Her Gracious Majesty has almost reached the base of the steps. His Regal Highness goes to the top of the steps to await his queen. Her Majesty passes under the arched sabers of the Queen's Own Hussars and approaches the top step where she will kneel to be crowned and presented with the ring. The King moves forward to place the diadem upon the Queen's head. His Majesty places the ring on the finger of the Queen. As the King helps the Queen to her feet, the countesses, the princesses, and the hussars rise. The countesses and the princesses will then go back to either side of the throne room. The Queen's hussars take their places at the foot of the throne room. Let me tell you a little bit about Her Majesty. The 55th Queen of Ak-Sar-Ben is a representative of two prominent Omaha families, the Storrs family and the Todd family. She's the 22-year-old daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Robert H. Storrs, 207 North Fair Acres Road. Miss Storrs and her parents were born in Omaha. Her paternal grandparents were the late Mr. and Mrs. Gottlieb Storrs, who settled here in 1865. The Queen's education began in Omaha at Brownell Hall and Central High School. After graduation from Radford Junior College, Radford, Massachusetts, in 1946, she went to the University of Nebraska at Lincoln. She majored in journalism and received her Bachelor of Arts degree in 1948. At the university, Miss Storrs belonged to Kappa Alpha Theta sorority and was elected to Theta Sigma Pi, National Honorary Women's Journalism Sorority. She's a member of the Junior League of Omaha and did her provincial in 1948 at the Hattie B. Monroe Home for Convalescent Children and at the Junior League Hospitality Shop at the Children's Memorial Hospital. She was also the provincial editor of the League News Sheet. This is the third time that Miss Storrs has participated in an Ak-Sar-Ben coronation. She was a princess in 1948 at the coronation of Miss Catherine Ann Code and William D. Lane. In 1935, Miss Storrs was a train bearer to the Queen. Her only brother, Todd Storrs, was a ring bearer at the 1932 coronation. Their mother, Mildred Todd, was a princess at the coronation of Mrs. Isaac W. Carpenter, Jr. The new Queen has blonde hair, which she wears in a medium bob, and brown eyes, weighs 115 pounds, is 5 feet 4 inches tall. She likes music and sang with the a cappella choir at Central High School and was soloist for the Bradford College Glee Club. She's keen about swimming, fond of golf, dancing, skiing, and likes to cook. While attending Bradford, Susan wrote articles and stories for the college magazine The Quill. She received an award for the best short story upon graduation. And now the King's Hussars march to the throne, present sabers, about face, and make their exit, joined by the Queen's Hussars. The Chancellor announces that it is the wish of their Majesties to dedicate this night a gala occasion for their subjects with music and gaiety. The governors and the King's Council escort the ladies of the court to the ballroom for dancing and joviality. A few more notes on Her Gracious Majesty. The Queen's family belongs to Trinity Cathedral Church, the Omaha Country Club, the Omaha Club, and the Omaha Athletic Club. Mrs. Storrs, mother of the Queen, was a charter member of the Omaha Junior League and served on the board for many years. She was president of the Brownell Hall Alumni Association, active in community chess drives, and is on the board of the Clarkson Hospital Service League. Mr. Storrs, the Queen's father, is vice president of the Storrs Brewing Company, and this year, with his son Todd, bought radio stations KOWH and KOAD. Mr. Storrs' civic activities are numerous. He's a director of the Agricultural Resources Foundation, Incorporated, to mention one of the many. Ak-Sar-Ben's king, 55, James Leroy Welsh, was raised in the Nebraska town of Prairie Home, located 10 miles east of Lincoln. It was too small for a school of its own, so he had to walk 1.5 miles each morning to the little white schoolhouse in the country. It was a great day in Prairie Home in the fall of 1903, when the youngsters of the town attended their own school in their own town, and there was a happy smile on the face of 13-year-old Roy Welsh as he bid his parents goodbye, ran out the door of his combined home, grocery store, and post office, and enrolled in the 8th grade. After 1 year of school there, the highest offered in Prairie Home, by the way, the oldest of 8 children in the J.H. Welsh family couldn't decide what to do, so he returned to soak up additional studies and help a teacher who had far too many students to handle. That fall, Roy Welsh was one of several farm boys who enrolled in a Lincoln Business School. He studied typewriting, bookkeeping, and shorthand. Young Roy paid $2 weekly in advance for 21 meals and $3.25 a month for a room. A year later, he landed a job with the Lincoln office of H.O. Barber & Sons Company, operators of a string of country elevators. He was a stenographer and bookkeeper, sweeping out the office each morning and sewing grain sacks during odd hours. His pay, $10 a week. During the 6 years with the Barber Company, the smell of wheat sacks and the taste of soft kernel became a part of him. When he was 22, Mr. Welsh decided that there wasn't much future in Lincoln as an expanding grain market, so he set his eyes on Omaha and came to town without a job. A few days later, he was given a tryout on the road for the Omaha Elevator Company by the company's president, Edward Porter Peck, the third king of Ak-Sar-Ben. On Christmas Day of that year, 1912, he married Helen Smith, a young Lincoln lass whom he'd met while with the Barber Company. He remained with the Elevator Company until 1917, when he enlisted in the United States Army Balloon School and served until the armistice was signed. Only a few hours after his change from Private Welch to Citizen Welch, he received a telegram from a man he'd met while traveling for the elevator firm before entering the service. It was signed Hugh Butler, manager of the Crete Mills, and contained an offer for a partnership in the grain business. Citizen Welch had plenty of energy and initiative, but no money, and he told Mr. Butler of his plight. The partnership was formed in 1918, after Mr. Welch signed a note for his share. They hired a stenographer and became the Butler Welch Grain Company on the Omaha Grain Exchange. Mr. Welch was president of the exchange in 1939 and has served 2 terms as president of the Grain and Feed Dealers National Association. It was a partnership that lasted for 25 years. The organization grew into one of the most successful grain firms in the Midwest. They are now operating a terminal elevator in Omaha, Council Bluffs, Nebraska City, and Waverly, Iowa. The total storage capacity is 2 million bushels of grain. United States Senator Hugh Butler sold his interest to Mr. Welch when the firm was given the job of buying wheat for the government. As president of the Farm Crops Processing Corporation, which operated the alcohol plant in Omaha during World War II, Roy Welch became intensely interested in a bright new field on the agriculture horizon, chemergy. During the last few years, chemergist Welch has addressed scores of clubs and scientific groups from Winnipeg to Washington, from Atlantic City to Portland. He's recognized as a national leader in the field of chemergy. He's a member of the board of the Midwest Research Institute of Kansas City, a member of the board of the Southwest Research Institute of San Antonio, Texas, and he helped organize Enzymes Incorporated of Eagle Grove, Iowa. Mr. and Mrs. Welch have one son, James Leroy Jr., who lives with his wife, the former Marion Hughes, at 1406 South 78th Street. James Jr. was a pilot in the Air Force during World War II and was shot down over Vienna on his 22nd mission. He spent 11 months as a prisoner of war. Young Jim, along with D.O. Aller and H.B. Waller, are partners in the present Butler Welch Company. The king has 2 sisters, Mrs. Jessie Ward and Mrs. May Bray, and one brother, Guy, all of whom live in Prairie Home. Ak-Sar-Ben King 55 ascends to the throne to share the domain of the recent past kings of Ak-Sar-Ben. In 1948, Mr. W.D. Lane was chosen. Mr. Lane continues to serve on the Board of Governors. In 1947, Mr. Leonard E. Hertz was King Ak-Sar-Ben 53. The selection of Mr. Hertz came after many years of devoted public service to Ak-Sar-Ben land. In 1946, Mr. A. Lohman was King Ak-Sar-Ben 52. And Mr. Lohman, as in the case of all other kings of Ak-Sar-Ben, was accorded this high honor as a fitting climax to many years of public service and civic accomplishment. And now, as the Ak-Sar-Ben coronation for 1949 comes to a close, it behooves us to board our mythical time machine, reverse the controls, and whiz back in a return journey to the 20th century. With a warm glow in our hearts, let us always remember the all too brief time spent in the period of the French Renaissance. From Ak-Sar-Ben Coliseum, Friday, October 21st, 1949, I bid you good night.